Alright, hi everybody, good afternoon, happy 12/21. Thank you all for being here. First, I appreciate you. We have a great performance lined up today. So excited. We have the great Hayoung Lyou on piano visiting us from New York City. Give her a hand. Seajun and I are playing as well. We're going to be doing a mixture of Hayoung's originals and some tunes, just some jazz standards that we'll be playing. Sort of reference the world we're in right now with like bebop and 50s, getting into the 60s. So should be a lot of fun. Sit back and relax. We'll chat closer to the end of class with questions and answers and everything. We're going to start with a really great song called Stablemates. So hope you enjoy.
Stablemates, man.
Not too fast.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
1, 2.
It's like,
One.
yeah.
1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Okay, Windup.
One. So we're gonna be playing some. She just released the album called Myth of. Can you pronounce the last word?
Called The Myth of Catabasis.
Yeah. And we will be playing. It's actually a piano trio album. So we're gonna be playing some of her music and also music that is not even in the record, even more brand newer ones. And this one is called
Windup. You can listen to my album if you like it on every platform for music.
Sure.
One, two, three.
Intro to or just songs? Simple. Shoulder, Ombre intro. Shoulder or Ombre intro.
Still on the
Maybe you can do the album version.
yeah.
Ombre?
Accompany me if you it's in like 15, like 4, 4, 4, 3.
Mm-hmm. Or you did it twice.
No, she's saying.
I'll do it open.
Oh, she's doing it open.
Yeah. And then I'll cue in the first. Oh, yeah.
One next time.
At least time. At least time.
At least the time. Okay. Hi. The song you just heard was called Ombre. It's based on Italian composer piece. Yeah, Luigi Dalla Piccola's piece, and I wanted to make it a jazz version out of it, and we just improvised on it. And it was before it was like a minute or so, and now it's like 7 minutes. Yeah. So, the update. Next song we're gonna play.
This one, please.
Guess something.
Something.
Either Celia or
Yeah, we'll travel sometime into jazz era and play a bebop tune
called. I think it's called.
Celia. Yeah.
Yeah, we are gonna play a piece called Celia, which is written by a composer, Powel, and pianist. I think
We talked about it.
we talked about it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. Celia. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go right into.
No intro.
Is it the loaded?
Just stop it.
So no intro. Okay.
Oh, Q&A in circle? Okay, yeah, okay. So, it's 12:55. Thank you for being here. We're going to do the little Q&A now, and then we're going to end with the song after that. So, now is the time to ask any burning questions you have about music, drums, bass, piano. Yeah.
What was the first song called?
Stablemates by written by Benny
Benny
Golson.
Golson, yeah.
Roughly saying maybe hard bop.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, that's a good tune. It's an odd tune, but it's stable. Yeah. What else?
No. Nobody.
Ah, yeah.
What jazz pianist inspired you the most?
There are a lot of jazz pianists that I loved and still love. I started with Ethan Iverson. He was part of a Bad Plus, and I think he knows a lot about other music too that he can bring into the jazz that I'm really into. Yeah, and he inspired me to practice bebop when I was at school, even though he's from like other side of the bebop, more like avant-garde, I'll say. But then he was practicing bebop a lot at when he was like 45 years old or something. He was still like walking around with the beat, like but Powel melody, like singing, and that really inspired me. I want to do that. I want to continue that. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
So we haven't discussed about the Bad Plus or anything, but I don't know. Does anyone knows Bad Plus? I guess no one. Yeah. So
Yeah. Bad Plus is like jazz meets grunge rock. We'll talk about it when we get to like the end of the class, like 2000s.
yeah.
But pianist Ethan Iverson is really great at a wide range of styles, including bebop.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? What other questions? Yeah.
What was the name of your album again?
It's called The Myth of Catabasis.
Myth of Catabasis. Yeah. What else? Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't really have a question. I just want to say, like, all three of you are great, and this performance is awesome.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. We had a show last night, so we're warmed up. Okay, well.
Although early morning, I mean not early morning, but I'll say earlier side of the performance is always hard.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think we should maybe play the last tune. So this is a piece that she recently wrote, but it's not in the album, but it's gonna be in the next album. I think it's gonna be a hit on the next album. Called Circle. You wanna add anything, Hayoung, or just play? Yeah, we'll play this one. Hayoung Lyou on the piano, like for the guest. And the bow. And
We're still doing the like we did last night at C or D?
yeah,
Okay. Cool.
I'm gonna do super short.
Yeah, I will too.
super short anthem.
That's okay.
Super short.
Oh, super short anthem?
Yeah.
Can we do one last song? Yes, sure.
Start from my solo. Start from my solo. No, actually, just had. Maybe you one solo. We have.
Okay, super short?
Yeah, just not open solo.
Go. Okay. Great. Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah.